And it's a good thing I came back to this because I was muted. I apologize. So let me start back over. um, I was muted. It's been that kind of a day today, guys. I apologize. But welcome to my live stream. Peter, Nick, Jared, thank you for letting me know. Once again, I did not have audio. Let me know if you hear me. I'm off mute now, so you should hear me. And it's a good thing I came back to this because I was muted. I apologize. Okay, it looks like I'm live now. All right, guys, continue to settle in. I know we've got some people that are going to be joining here in a few minutes. I apologize for the audio snafu there. Let me know if you can hear me. Awesome. Great. Good to hear. So very briefly, let's just go over what has transpired with Hurricane Matthew over the last 24 hours since we last spoke. I have this image up here because you can see that the eye wall took a little bit of a beating as it made its way over western Haiti. From what I hear, there are areas of western Haiti that receive 30 to 35 inches of sustained rainfall, and it continues to rain in those regions. Locally, an average of 15 to 20 inches of rain. So the images that are going to come out of Haiti, I would say over the next 24 to 48 hours, I'm anticipating them being pretty devastating. I'm hoping for the best, that the people were aware of this ahead of time. They had somewhere to go, excuse me, and, took notice that this is a very serious storm making its way north and crossing western Haiti. As you can see right now, too, it is starting to cross the very, very eastern tip of Cuba. And this area here, which I'm actually going to highlight, give me just a second here. This area here, actually a little bit, rather in this region, this is very mountainous, so it's going to do a lot to the banding from the inner wall. Maybe not so much the inner wall, but that very outer wall of the inner wall, it will take a bit of a beating. But it did go a little bit northeast of where was expected, because the eye wall was expected to make its way over eastern Cuba and then into the Bahamas. But it is avoiding that. And that's rather interesting because it's almost like it's avoiding the coastline of Cuba. Obviously, the waters are very warm there, so it's gone under some strengthening, even though it's between two land masses. And I think that's worthy of note because a lot of the models had it weakening, not significantly, but a definite noticeable difference in weakening. And as you can see here, some of these outer bands, which are in this area, if you can see these cloud tops right here, you can see convection is starting to fire up on the outer part of this storm already as it approaches the bathwater that is the Bahamas. So I'm starting to think that the models, as they have consistently done so over the last 36 to 48 hours, they're underestimating the strength of this storm, and it's kind of been a trend with all of the models. And the European's gotten a little better with its initialization over the last few days, but again, it continues to initialize a weaker storm than actuals. So keep that in mind as we make our way closer to later this week. And this is another model, rather not a model, but this is another product that really gets into the eye wall. And I find it interesting because you can see as it was making landfall in western Haiti, you could see the eye wall had actually gone through a full replacement right before it made landfall. So it was at its peak strength at the time, based on conditions, before it made landfall. And you can see as it loops here, after it made landfall, the outer wall did take a bit of a beating, but again, it's now starting to reform. As you see, it's made its way over those warmer waters. And it does appear it's going to tick a little bit to the northwest as it makes its way over eastern Cuba. But this is something that has already been modeled, but was modeled even just a tick further west. So because it won't be interacting with that mountainous terrain that is in eastern Cuba, just north of Guantanamo Bay, this is not going to impede the system as much as previously modeled. So that is something, again, to keep in mind. And as I make my way and transition into the next part of my live stream, what I wanted to talk about is there's a lot of talk today about the 12Z European run, which was an hour late, thanks to, I believe, some sort of a server issue across the entire mainframe. So probably a Windows 10 update of some kind. There's a joke there somewhere. No, but the interesting part about it is when the European ran, its solution that popped out was very strange, especially the tail end of the actual run. And we're going to get into that as I go frame by frame down a high-res Euro run from earlier today. But after the 96th hour, things got really weird with it. And initially when I was looking at it, I kind of dismissed it a little bit. But I'm starting to lean towards maybe that the European was on to something with this recent hook, recent change in direction. And it's thrown a wrench into this. It has really kind of made me question how this storm is going to evolve beyond 96 hours. So let me get into that. First frame I'm going to show you. Oh, and I apologize. This is one of the images that I found in regards to Western Haiti. As you can see, significant flooding. The conditions were like this for nearly 18 hours. So, these are going to be common scenes that you see in the media over the next day or two, for sure. All right, so this is a high-resolution model. A high-resolution frame of the Euro. And as you see here, it shows a late Thursday, early Friday morning near landfall just north of Miami, Fort Lauderdale area. This would obviously be pretty devastating to the area considering the amount of rainfall we're talking on top of the winds. And the last time that this actual strength of the storm hit was in Hurricane Andrew. And that was many years ago. And that's something that is concerning because roughly 9 to 12 million people have moved to Florida since the last major hurricane landed. And they have never experienced a hurricane. So we're actually seeing a lot of people that are unprepared, asking questions in regards to, what do you do to actually prepare for these things? Meanwhile, you got South Carolina, who's already initiating some evacuations, which for some people think, that's actually a little premature. And I'm kind of on the fence of that. I understand why they're doing it. It might be a little early, but at the same time, it's taking action. Florida, on the other hand, because of the amount of people that they have, they're kind of dragging their feet a little bit on this, maybe kind of waiting it out. And that might be one of the hardest decisions a governor would ever have to make. So, I really hope that this does not verify what I'm about to show you, because if it does, and they have not made mandatory evacuations along the coastline over the in the next 8 to 12 hours, there could be some serious issues. So this is the first frame I wanted to show you, which shows initial landfall. You can see the outer wall here. It's making direct contact with the coast. And these are 6-hour frames, okay? So not 24-hour like you would see in a normal model run. This is the high-resolution Euro. 6 hours later, you can see it again. It continues to grind up the coast. Hurricane strength winds make it pretty far inland. I would say about a third of the way in. Not to mention driving rains at rainfall rates of 5 to 6 inches per hour in certain regions. We'll get into the rainfall here in just a minute. Next frame, 6 hours later. Once again, this is sitting and deepening right off the Florida coast. The eye wall riding up the East Florida coast at a Category 4 strength. Again, this isn't making landfall and just simply going this direction, okay, and making its way west in a 50-mile path as cars through the state. Now, instead, it's saying, I'm going to stay along the coast, and I'm going to continue to ride the coast right up along 95, where all the major cities happen to be, and there's going to be significant flooding. I mean, I don't need to tell you people down in Miami, if you get a stiff rain, the water has nowhere to go. Just like Houston, poorly designed. You get a stiff rain in Houston, there's always going to be flooding. The same, if not worse, goes for Miami. So if you are in Miami, you're definitely hoping for an east shift. If you're anywhere along this coast, you're hoping for an east shift, as well as I am, because this could seriously do some damage to the infrastructure along Florida. 6 hours later, now we're already, go back here, we're 12 hours into the storm. Okay. 6 hours later, we're still in Florida. We're still in Florida on this run. On the best model that we have available, this is 18 hours of hurricane strength winds, Category 4 strength hurricane at this point. So this concerns me because the European has made a west shift consistently, a little windshield wiper effect here and there, but it has made a west shift consistently along with the GFS over the last 3 days. And here we are, Thursday, this is going to start affecting the coast if modeled correctly. And people are just now starting to understand. I'm even seeing in chat here people saying that news is making this out to be tropical storm force. I don't know why the lag exists on this, but it shouldn't. And that's why I really praise what South Carolina is doing. Because, guys, look, even if this were to miss, even if this were to go east, right, and it totally fools everybody, and the models were wrong, and the meteorologists get killed for it, you know what? You're going to forget about a night that you had to move inland and stay in a hotel for one night on a busted storm. You're going to forget about that in a year. But you will never forget if you were not evacuated on time and you lost loved ones or property or family or whatever it may be. You will never forget the fact that if you were not told to evacuate on time. And that is the truth. Better safe than sorry. And I will continue to harp that. I don't care if meteorologists have an accuracy bias, like they want to be as accurate as possible. How about let's just be safe as possible? That's why they exist. And I'll continue to harp on that, with whoever I talk with regarding storms, because all it takes is a Katrina. All it takes is a scenario where, like this, if this verified, where people weren't informed or weren't taking it seriously or things of that nature. All it takes is one of those, and suddenly the confidence has been lost in the people that are supposed to warn them. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. But I really think meteorologists need to take this European run and say, okay, we are going to run with it, and we're going to let people know that Florida to South Carolina needs to watch out. Okay, next. I'll get off my soapbox. Sorry. It's just something that's kind of been bothering me a little bit today. So as you see here, 18 hours sustained, Category 4 into Category 3, strength, beach erosion, flooding, etc. It's really not good for Florida. 6 hours later, Oh, wait, let me go back here. So I apologize. Okay, yes. 6 hours later. We're still in North Florida, Jacksonville area, now making our way into Charleston. I'm sorry, making our way into Savannah, Georgia, in areas. Again, the flooding and the surge will be rather devastating for these areas because of the fact of how it came in. It's going to, basically, the surge is coming this direction because that's the direction of the storm. So any of these areas are going to be trapping water that surged. Any of these inlets and bays will be 6 to 12 feet in some areas. Don't quote me on how much yet, because we got to get a little bit closer to the storm to understand, but 40 to 60 foot waves are a definite at this point. So here we are, a day later, and it's still in Florida. This thing is taking an extended vacation per the Euro. 6 hours later. Now we're at 30 hours. Now it's sitting right over the Georgia coast, make its way into South Carolina, all the while dumping tons of rain and Category 3 strength winds, Category 4 as well. Again, just not a good scenario. And I guess I'm trying to do this slowly, so maybe it sinks in for people that if this happens, it's worse than a direct hit somewhere, because the eye wall literally guides itself right along the coast, and it doesn't weaken as much as a normal landfall would too. So that's something that needs to be considered. Next frame, here we are making our way more into South Carolina. The precip shield extends itself all the way up into southern North Carolina. Southern Carolina at this point is flooding. It's receiving 40 to 60 foot waves, surges extending 10 to 12 feet, beach erosion, the whole 9 yards. And notice, it's staying out to sea just enough where it's not going to make a total landfall, but it will have hurricane effects right along the coast. In the next frame, again 6 hours later, now over 40 hours of a storm sitting around, and it starts to make its way back out to sea. You can see this direction here, but it's giving a kiss goodbye, if you will, as it makes its way out. So here is an interesting spread for the European. And I say it's interesting because you see a ton of landfalls here into Florida, even far south as Miami and south of Miami in some of these landfalls. Yes, to reiterate, this is the European model, everybody, that I am been harping on. I'll go back over it really quick here in a minute just to show you, but I'm getting into the ensemble members right now. So the European model is run roughly 48 times, and then they take every run and they create the operational run, but then the ensemble run is what this is, and it shows you the path of all the different runs. Okay, as you see here, there are a ton of tracks that bring this into Florida. There are a bunch that scrape the line, and then there are some that go a little bit out to sea. Let me talk about the ones that go out to sea here. So if you're in South Carolina and North Carolina, you do not want this scenario. Okay, if you're in Florida, you definitely don't want this scenario, but you don't want this scenario if you're in South Carolina or North Carolina, and here's why. If these tracks are correct, that means this is quicker, and the faster the storm is, the more likely it is to make a direct landfall on either South Carolina or the Outer Banks. Okay, and we'll get into why here in a minute, but as you can see, these EPS members are quicker, whereas these are slower, so they're more of a coastal scraper. So that's, none are truly all the way out to sea anymore. There were a ton of spaghetti models for the EPS that went out. They don't exist anymore. They are essentially gone at this point, as we have narrowed ourselves down to the event. Next, I'm going to start getting into rainfall. Now, it's going to be a little hard to see because this is kind of a terribly, kind of a bad graphic, to be honest. But this is the Florida coastline right here, if you can see my cursor moving. And this is from estimates from about 12 to 8 hours ago. I think these are going to shift a little west based on the models. But if you look here along this line right here is the eastern coast of Florida. You have a 10-inch range, you've got a 7-inch range, and a 5-inch range of rains. This is over the course of about 40 to 48 hours, so 2 days. A good amount of rainfall along with the winds. But again, I think this is a little bit of an underestimate based on what Matthew has done in Haiti, and will move into more favorable conditions in the Bahamas versus where it is now, which I'll get into that in just a second as well. And that's my next slide. What are the conditions like for Matthew? Where will we be moving? Well, if you see here, this path is generally an agreement now between the GFS and European model. Let me just expand this here a little bit. Give me a second. Sorry. And as you can see, the sea surface temperatures are very high. And we were talking about quote-unquote bathwater. It's talked about all the time in the Bahamas. If you ever swam there before, again, it's like hopping into bathwater. But near 30 degrees Celsius at this time of the year, and some areas here in South Florida where it is modeled to move over are about 31 Celsius, which for anyone asking, that's around 88 degrees Fahrenheit. So the point I'm trying to make is you can even see as it makes its way up here along the coast of Florida up into this region, it will not pass over waters that are any cooler than 29 degrees Celsius, which for you to sustain a high category 3, low category 4 storm, you need at least around the 27 to 28, 29 range, and you have that very easily. That's something to consider. Again, trends. You have the warm waters, you have the western shifts, you have the Europeans saying that's nearly the same thing the GFS is saying, which we'll get into here in just a second. These are all the trends on this current system. And here we go. I'm going to use this first. This is the European model. This is the 24-hour frame, so it's not going to be as high resolution as what you saw before. But here's what I want to show you. It's clear. You can see it makes that scrape, if you will, against the Florida coast. Then comes up into shores of Georgia and South Carolina. Then makes its way out due east, and then what? Decides to curve south, and then it decides to curve then back out over Florida. I'll let you see the whole loop here. You see that? One more time. You can see the European come up, go out, come back across Florida. So that was what got people up in arms, including myself, because that's the first time the European had ever showed that feature. And here we are 3 days away from the event. And then I looked at the GFS ensemble, the GEFS, if you want to. It's a terrible acronym, but watch what it does. It makes its way up the coast, again, just like the European. The ridge builds and breaks down, and you can't see anything because I'm not using the right dynamic. Hold on just a moment. Let's go here. Give me just a moment. Well, here's what we'll do. I apologize for that. We're going to go over to the GFS because there's a bigger point I'm trying to make here. Just understand the GFS ensemble does essentially the same thing. It shows that loop back, right? Why is the European doing that? Well, if we look here, and we'll go back to the European model, and I will change the product here so you can see what I'm talking about. This trough here is still pretty strong on the European. But not only is it strong, it's very broad, right? It's not sharp, right? It doesn't cut down like this. It's more wide, more lumbering as it makes its way across the U.S. So what the European believes is that this ridge will break down quicker, that is holding in Matthew. And that trough, which is hard to see here in this particular model, that trough, let me go back to the other dynamic that we were just talking about. There we go. That trough will cause this to come back over. Now, that's what the European is saying, okay? I looked into it. I'm trying to understand the trough a little bit better as the European is modeling it, and I don't really understand it. It isn't making much sense to me. There's something that's off about it, right? Through 96 hours on the European, I think it does pretty well. Even all the way up to 120 hours makes sense. But beyond that, I can't understand why it would do a full rotation like that and back out over to the coast. So let's see what the run does tonight, and we'll see what the run does tomorrow afternoon before we go jump off the ship and think we're going to have a recurve that's going to do a full, 360 degrees. I don't think that is the case right now, but I just wanted to show that. Here is what I think the ridge, as the GFS is stating, is going to actually do, and what the trough is going to do. And when I talk about the ridge, that's this red modeled area here, guys. Okay, when I talk about a trough, that's this blue modeled area. So as we move this along, you can see this ridge, it really builds. It is pushing itself down on Matthew, and Matthew is eroding at the surface. But notice right in here, if you guys can see it, let me zoom in a little bit. Notice right in here, what happens to this trough? It splits. It's no longer as sharp as it once was. It essentially splits. This is interesting because of that feature. Where am I going here? There we go. Because of that feature, it is allowing this to break down the ridge, and this is again a piece that doesn't matter anymore, but it then causes this section here to be more broad like the European solution and cause Matthew to get pushed up the coast and then out to sea. And this is the GFS run that ran this evening. Let me show it to you one more time. That way you can see what I'm talking about. But again, here comes Matthew across the Bahamas, across Nassau, right up the coast of Florida. And as you can see, this trough has been split. The ridge breaks down and it goes out to sea. I think this is significant because this is the first time we can actually say that the GFS and the European have nearly the same idea, the same end result of the trough. Not how it happens, but the end result is the same, which that the trough is more broad and less sharp. This would be excellent news for anyone in the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic and Outer Banks, because if this solution verifies, there will not be a direct hit into any of those areas. However, because of the setup, because of the fact that that trough and ridge are essentially fighting, and the ridge continues to build as strong as it is on both the European and GFS models, that means that the coast of Florida and South Carolina are going to get a longer duration event of sustained hurricane conditions than it would if it were just a direct landfall. Essentially one of the worst case scenarios for that region. Because if it were just a direct hit, again, we'll go back to one of these European models. If this were just a direct hit and made its way west, this swath of Florida would be in a lot of trouble. But you would not get this southern tip of Florida to the northern end of Florida. The entire east coast of Florida would not see those conditions if it were just a straight landfall. And this is why I think this run and the GFS runs coming together with the same solution is, in my opinion, one of the scarier things I've seen a hurricane actually do that's been modeled just 3 to 4 days out. So that is why I should tell you guys that, in my opinion, right now, I don't think there's going to be much change to these models, that this solution is going to be close to as verifying as we can get until it actually happens. So last thing I'll put out there, and this is back to the GFS solution. This is a tweet from a forecaster that I follow. And he says here, the last 8 GFS suites have trended towards less amplified with central U.S. trough this week, like we discussed, right? Less sharp, less amplified. Huge reason for trend east as storm nears latitude of Outer Banks. What he's basically saying is, hey, and you can see the evolution of all the runs. See how deep it is, and then after each run, it broadens. It's not as amplified. The less amplified that ridge is, the less amplified that trough is, the more likely it is to kick out to sea after it hits South Carolina and won't affect the rest of the coast. So, as a recap for anyone that missed, Eyewall is beginning to reform even as it makes its way over eastern Cuba. Per the high-res model from earlier today with the European run, this is 6 hours between frames, and you can see here a near Miami landfall right up the coast. And at this entire duration, this is a Category 4 into a Category 3 system. And I know I mentioned earlier that I don't believe a lot of the initializations are doing well, and I've seen around 30 to 15 to 30 millibars off surface pressure, which is pretty significant when you consider right now it's around the high 940s, and the GFS run had it verified. It's starting off as, I think, a verification initially of or initialization of 965. So it's off from real world intensity. And that's about it, guys. That's all I really have. I hope that I'm going to go through and take a look at some of your questions. I hope I've reiterated why I think this is a system that must be taken seriously because of the GFS and European models coming to an agreement within the first 100 hours of the storm, which will be the most impactful as they are currently modeled. As quite a bit of activity in the chat here, so give me a second. If you guys have any questions, please go ahead and post them and let me know. Okay. Unfortunately, Michael, I cannot link that image in chat. It comes from a private source. So sorry about that. Peter saying that news in Jacksonville is making the storm sound like it's tropical storm status. You know, I think they might be looking at later impacts because of the landfall that it's making. But I think after tonight's runs, which I don't anticipate changing much because the storm is performing as expected, maybe a little, like maybe 50 miles east, which is only going to allow it to strengthen. But because the storm is performing as modeled, I expect the same with each model run. Let's see here. Michael asking those hurricane force winds over Orlando that you're showing with the high res imagery. There are quite a few that are pretty gosh darn close. It at the very least Cat 1 to strong tropical storm winds, more than they've seen in a very, very long time. That's for sure. And look, if you have any loved ones, family, friends, anybody that is up the I-95 corridor from Florida through South Carolina, I would definitely, if they can, visit family further inland. And just do the normal precautions for something that of this magnitude. I think people have forgotten that back 10, 15 years ago, it was not out of the question to board up and leave, right? I think a lot of people have gotten complacent with how inactive the Atlantic has been over the last 10 to 15 years. So this is what people are being asked to do in South Carolina right now is not unprecedented. It has happened before. The recency effect is gone. It hasn't happened in the social media era. So. And yes, I did say 40 to 60 foot waves and storm surge as high as 16 feet in areas that are modeled early. I don't have any pulled up here, but if you want a link for that, shoot me a message on the comments and on the actual video that gets posted, and I will provide it. Yeah, the stores are going to clear out pretty quickly, guys. That's for gosh darn certain. Just going down all these comments here, guys. So Savannah, Georgia is actually one of the ones that that concerns me the most because of the surrounding topography. It's such, there's a lot of marshland around that area, and it's going to get sustained surge and flooding. So I don't think the rains will be the biggest issue. I think the surge is definitely going to be the biggest issue there. Jared, so if this thing pushes any more west and impacts South Florida head on, the odds become greater that it just pulls straight through Central Florida. Interaction with the trough might cause it to recurve back over Florida and back out over the water, which would spare South Carolina in that respect. If it happens this way, like we said, it would scrape right up the coast. But it is not out of the question that this would make a landfall because of how far west this has come. But at this time, based on the upper dynamics from that trough and the ridge that is building, it is almost guiding it, almost like someone peeling away the coast, if you will. So someone asked about the trough and some Sandy-esque turn into the mid-Atlantic. Guys, I won't speculate on that because that is a little far out, and this is a slow-moving system. I'm going to touch base on Thursday into Friday if that looks like it's a possibility, but at this time, I would say no. So my friends in Southeast Virginia, I see someone mentioning Hampton, Virginia. Definitely keep a very close eye on this storm because if that trough that I discussed earlier, which I will bring up here on the GFS, if this trough is sharper, and I think on a previous run, if it's more like this is a previous run of GFS. See how much sharper it is versus this run where it's a little broader, right? It's not as steep. If this trough happens, then it will shoot up the coast and will definitely affect Southeast Virginia up along Northeast. If this trough occurs, then it's going to kick more out to sea and scraping like the Outer Banks at that point. People asking in Miami, they see the high-res image. So look, guys, all I'm going to say is this. If you are comfortable being in Miami when essentially the most valued model that it's in existence has just shifted this into your backyard, if you're comfortable staying and you have good drainage where you live and you have a plan of action and you're okay with possibly being out of power for quite some time, then it's safe. I hate to put it that way, but that is what you're looking at this point. Those are the questions that you have to ask yourself, that you're prepared to be. And ask the people from Tallahassee. A Cat 1 just hit with 79 to 83 mile an hour sustained winds, some gusts of 95 to 110. Ask them about how life has been since Hermine. And they didn't get anything near this. Yes, high winds in the interior of North Florida as well. Guys, the topography of Florida is flat as hell. There is absolutely nothing to stop winds from careening across from the coast and inland. So, I mean, for God's sakes, Katrina, right? It passed over Florida and made its way into New Orleans, and it never weakened because the topography, just nothing impeded it. So I think they're listing that tropical storm warning for the Miami area right now as just like a placeholder, and then tomorrow they're going to amp up the seriousness of the situation. My personal opinion, I think the National Hurricane Center was a little late with their hurricane watches. I would have done it earlier in the morning to give a full day of awareness to people, to allow them to prepare, and then have all of Wednesday and Thursday to make their way out of the state, or find a safe place. Asking about structural damage. Based on the scale, a Category 4 is capable of taking down a home that has a foundation. Not mobile homes, of course, would be in really bad shape, but it is able to tear apart structures like homes. Now, concrete buildings are definitely safer, but any houses, loose structures, like things like that, can come down from the winds. Roofs taken off, etc. Candace, you're asking why are they stalling in severity. There's like a 12-hour lag to major media networks. I think there are people behind the scenes that doubt a lot of stuff that meteorologists tell them. And look, to be fair, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that misses. Look at Hermine. Myself, I thought there was going to be more of an East Coast impact based on what models were showing just 3 to 4 days out, and it totally changed. But that was a much different setup than this is. There was no ridge to hold this in like there is with this system. So confidence with this track is much higher than it was with Hermine. So I think they're a little hesitant sometimes to step out there. But as I've always said, you will forget within a few years the one night you had to spend inland because of a missed storm versus never forgetting the time you didn't get enough warning to evacuate. Yeah, Eric Williams, Matthew, it is rather hilarious, as some of my friends have pointed out as well, that this system is as amped as it is, being a namesake. And I don't feel any burden. All right, guys, I am going to look for any questions on my Facebook page. I know this ran a little bit longer than usual, but I feel there's a ton of information to get out there, so that's something that's worth noting. Oh, and thank you for the comments on the drapes in the room. Hey, this is my wife's doing. She does an excellent job decorating. Don't knock her. I love it in here. This is my office. So, it's a great guest room. It's an awesome guest room. Guys, and I'll continue taking questions. I see a lot of stuff coming here, so and I'll read the question out loud if it helps anyone else watching. Let's see. Look, pretty much, guys, anyone along the Florida coast, I'm going to reiterate this once again. This is initial landing, 6 hours later. I'm going to zoom out to get the full effect here. Okay, this is the European model that ran earlier today. It has a very good idea of how this is going to pan out because the GFS is saying nearly the same thing. So as you see right here, this is the initial landfall. 6 hours later, 6 hours later, this is a Category 4 strength system. Another 6 hours later, yet another 6 hours later, 6 hours later, so on and so forth. Guys, if this were to verify, this would be an absolute, this would be terrible for the entire coast of Florida into South Carolina. Let's hope for an east shift. That's what I'm going to pull for. But as we get closer to this event, the GFS and the Euro for the first 100 hours are in agreement on how this will pan out. I'm seeing someone ask about evacuation, when it would be possible. Look, you need to take notice to any local authorities on evacuations. You can get up and leave anytime you want to and go to family, friends, whatever. But of course, if you want to know anything official, you need to seek out your local government and find their relocation protocol and evacuation protocol. I can't give any advice on that. I'm not a government official by any means. There are areas that are prone to flooding, like New Orleans, especially inland. A lot of areas that have a ton of swampland. So with the rain that is going to be happening with this, I am sure that you'll see areas that get quite a bit of flooding due to the amount of rain. And not only that, when you get the winds that amp up, probably about 12 hours into this, you're going to have structures that fall because of that softer ground. Let's see here. No questions on here. Okay. Yes, these hurricanes definitely can spawn EF0, EF1 tornadoes, sometimes EF2. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Yet another danger that can come from hurricanes this strong. I'm not going to comment on the loop, guys. I don't know if I really believe the solution. If it's there tomorrow, I will definitely talk about it for sure. But Marcus, I'm gonna step away from answering that for right now because I don't think it's something that will actually happen. Self-indulging, you're asking why the models have been trending west. I would say mainly because of that ridge. The ridge was not modeled to be very strong just 3 days ago, and every day it has gotten stronger to the point where it might almost act like a Greenland block, which when we get these major snowstorms that come through the mid-Atlantic, for those of my Facebook followers, and we've talked about this in the past, you need that Greenland block in order for and pull up a map. You need a Greenland block or a Halifax block in order for a storm to get captured and come up the coast. In this case, the only thing causing this from not doing the same thing is this trough over here. This trough could save the Outer Banks and the rest of the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, as we were talking about before. Yeah, Augusta, Georgia, 125 miles inland. Hey, you're going to get some rain. Again, this thing would shift a little bit further west, right? I would say you would see the effects more, but I would say Augusta is far enough in where the wind shield and the precipitation field aren't going to be as severe, but you'll definitely get some rain. Okay, when we're talking about evacuation from Florida, if you are leaving when it initially hits, I just don't think that's smart. If you know it's going to hit, get out 12 hours at least ahead of time. And that would be sometime early Thursday morning that you would know. So, guys, if you don't have any other questions, again, thank you for joining. I'm really pulling for an eastern shift with this because, again, this scraping up the coast as it is truly one of the worst case scenarios that could come to fruition if the European and the GFS, which are coming to a consensus within the first 100 hours, are correct. So, for the Northeast right now, nothing to worry about. For Mid-Atlantic, not much to worry about. If you're in Southeast Virginia and Outer Banks, keep your eyes on it. But if you're in South Carolina, Georgia coast, anywhere up Florida coast and inland, you need to make actions now. Get yourself prepared and be safe. Guys, have a good one. Thank you. I will talk to you in the next one. Thank you.